I'd like to welcome Andy onto the stage now, and please do give him a big hand.
Good morning. We don't do theatre too often these days, so I thought, like, a little minor bit there, because we're going to need our hard hats for what's coming up. And Helen there was just alluding to some of the things that I think we're heading into. And of course, that's what we here, we do. We try to sort of look ahead to what's going on. We look at what's going on in the moment, but we try to give it context and try to look at the things that, you know, the wider mainstream is simply not looking at. And there's two issues that I think we do need to look at right now at the moment. Now, one I did visit last year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I don't want to do the same thing. But we do need to revisit AI, because that is absolutely huge. There's another big thing going on, and that's a super surge of awareness about the possibility of ETs actually being real, and it not just being some funny gimmicky thing, but a really serious part of our world that stands the chance of turning literally everything upside down. And those two things together, that's going to be very, very powerful. So, let's get rid of the hat for a minute. How many of you recognize this character here? Anyone? Yeah, there's one or two of you. So, this gentleman here with his own hard hat is a man called Gort. He's a robot, and you might know Gort better if you've ever seen this film, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Now, there's a later remake that you can forget that. This is a film that is really worth seeing. So Helen, by the way, what she doesn't tell you is she's more of a UFO expert than most people in this room. But she hadn't ever watched The Day the Earth Stood Still. And that's a film that, you know, has always struck me as one of the most important science fiction films ever made. So just a few weeks ago, we sat down and we watched it. And if you go online, you can get really good 4K restorations of it. Still looks brilliant. So it looks a bit schlocky in this poster here, but actually it isn't. And if you've never seen this film, I'll just give you a quick rundown of what it's all about. So a flying saucer arrives one day, as they do, and lands in Washington. And I love this 1950s mentality where all the people are allowed to be right next to it there. So they all gather, and of course then the army comes along and nobody knows what's going to come out of it. And eventually something does come out of it. And we have a gentleman here who we will later learn is called Klaatu, and there is this robot, Gort. So they're very imposing, and they stand there, and nobody knows what's going to happen. And it's all going well until Klaatu produces what is a gift for the world governments, but they think it's a weapon, so the soldiers gun him down. Now he survives, but it turns out they've really, really done the wrong thing here. Because the robot, and nobody knew what the robot was for, does not like this at all. So Gort suddenly stomps down, and the visor over his eyes lifts up, and in a special effect that still looks really good today, by the way, starts to destroy the tanks and the guns. Not the people yet, but he starts to destroy our weaponry. And Klaatu, luckily, has survived, and he says stop. And so then the robot goes back to sleep. Now, we're not going to go through everything in the movie, but eventually Klaatu takes off the helmet, and he's the rather handsome Michael Rennie, wonderful actor. And it turns out he's come to deliver a message. And the message is so important that the whole of humanity must hear it, not just the US government. But of course, the US government officials don't like that, so they decide to hold him captive. And that's when he decides, all right, I've got to get out of here. So he escapes into society and antics ensue. But the bottom line is this, that eventually, after having created this incredible display of the power that he and his race have, they stop all the electricity in the world just for 30 minutes, just to show that they can. Eventually, he gets to deliver the message. And the message is still so relevant today when you watch this. So bear in mind, this was happening with, just only a few years before had the atomic bombs that were at the end of World War II. So, this film's very much about that. He announces that they are here now because of the nuclear threat that we pose to other races. And they say, you can do what you want to each other, But when you get to nuclear levels, right, you're potentially a threat to all of us, and we cannot allow that. We come in peace, but if you cross the line, right, and this is the important revelation here, these robots, and presumably there's loads of other gawks out there as well, they will basically destroy you. They're not evil, but they have the power to do anything they want. And here's the key. They've given the power to what we would today call artificial intelligence. He says, we are not the bottom line. It's the robots that are the bottom line. We gave them the power so that then you couldn't have this kind of squabbling going on. They have the power, and if anybody, even them, transgresses, those robots will come and get you, and they have the power to destroy whole planets. So it ends on this kind of very ominous note. And of course, the moral of the story is, everybody, you might want to think about the way the world's going. So don't forget, this film, it was made, only, 6 years after Roswell. When you watch this film, you realize that they clearly had an awareness, because this has come more into awareness over the years. But whoever wrote the scripts, they seem to know something about what was going on. So if you don't know, in 1947, near the town of Roswell, there is a claim that there was a crash flying saucer. We should say here that the military, the local military, they released the press release saying that this had happened. It wasn't something somebody else ran, they said it, and then later on tried to kind of rescind all of that. So we heard even yesterday, there's various people that think it might be a hoax, that maybe they weren't aliens that the people saw lying around the crashed spaceship. I'm not sure, though, and I've always been a bit in the middle on this, but the more that I look into this, the more I think that maybe actually this was what it seemed to be. And of course, the claim's been that then the US military took that craft, and by the way, there's other claimed crashes, and were trying for years to copy the technology they found, and still are. So that's the argument. And down, in the vaults of Area 51 or whatever, the claim is that they are trying to get this technology for themselves. Now, just so you don't think I'm just an armchair researcher, just a few months ago, Helen and I went to Roswell. And that's as near as we got to the crash site, by the way. It's on private land. Actually, if you ever try, by the way, and you look it up on Google Maps, it will tell you where the crash site is. But it's wrong. It's a decoy. It's not the right place. We learned this later on. So we were only a few miles from it, but it was still really interesting to get the idea of what was going on. And then on the same trip, we got to the rear gates of Area 51. So this is this base where it is a real military test zone, where, of course, there's all these claims about what they're getting up to there with UFOs and alien bodies and so on. So you can get that. I mean, there's a famous cafe in the little village nearby, and they just go, oh, yes, drive up this road and you'll get there. It's not that secret. But when you get there, they all said, don't get too near the gates, though, right? Because that's when you cross the line, and you get anywhere near the gates, something very horrible might happen. But we got a little bit too near, and you could just see here, there's all these big siren things, and they all went off, and it's really scary. And it went, woo! And funnily enough, at that point, you leave. It's pathetic, isn't it? Look, I think they do this all the time to scare the tourists, and it works. We didn't even see a single person there. I reckon it's all just automated. But when you go to Roswell, you get a real insight into just how deeply, the talk of ETs has permeated. I must show you this. The hotel we stayed at did have a wonderful sign outside of it, and there it is. Crash here. You can't knock that, can you? So it's a gimmick, but by God, it's a good gimmick. And actually, right, so this looks super schlocky. So you walk around Roswell, and I'm not making this up, right? Do you want to see the lampposts? And here are the lampposts of Roswell. Right? So, okay, and you go, oh, right, yes, just a tourist trap, blah, blah, blah. But then it's interesting. You begin to look under the skin of this. And the fact that because I thought maybe they're all sick of hearing about this and they all just think it's a load of rubbish. Actually, no. We discovered, talking to people, quite a lot of people there are convinced something did happen. And so then you go to the official Roswell UFO Museum. And again, from the outside, you think, okay, touristy. And you go in and, yeah, sure, some of the displays are the kind of thing that you would expect to see. But then you realize that there is a deeper level to it. Now, this museum was set up by original Roswell witnesses, or at least relatives of witnesses. And by the way, there's now around 600, most of them are dead now, but, all on record, either witnesses or relatives who knew the witnesses who were then told the stories. And to me, you can't just say nothing happened, right? Whatever happened, we can argue about the detail. Something big, I think, certainly did happen at Roswell. But at the museum, they actually have a library. It's one of the most extensive esoteric libraries in the world. And that really impressed me. And then you read all the boards, and there's a lot of detail about what happened at Roswell. And you understand then they actually take this really seriously. So if you ever go, right, don't be put off by all the sort of, the kitsch on the outside. There is a lot more to it, and it is definitely well worth investigating. But what I'm saying here is that, for long years then, this kind of culture around ETs and UFOs, it has really permeated. And obviously, sci-fi movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, they've helped to cement this. Now, that's one of the best of the old sci-fi movies. I really recommend that you do watch it. On the other hand, of course, that then gave rise to the more kind of cheap B-movie, sort of horror sci-fi. And in the wake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, then when we got into the 60s, it was getting ever kind of sillier, but also ever darker. And then, we had all the Cold War paranoia themes that were woven into these films. So yes, they were aliens, but you were clearly meant to read them as the Reds under the bed and so on. Watch Invasion of the Body Snatchers, for instance. So, science fiction started to get darker. But then it's interesting because then you look at the 60s and you realize it was kind of, there's extremes there. You've got extreme light, you've got extreme dark. Because eventually there was a reaction against all the fear and all the authoritarianism that people had come up with. And you look back at the 60s now, and there's, of course, a lot of, worry that there was a big manipulation here socially. And certainly I'm sure that was the case, as there is always social manipulation. But I do also think there was something about these times that were something new. Now, of course, I was born in the 60s, and there'll be several of us here today. I'm a child of the 60s. This was the vibe that was going on when I was born into the world. And I think those of us that were, and I know quite a few people born in that generation, are the ones today trying to make a difference. And it's quite interesting. And where we are today has certain resonances with the 60s, but it isn't the same. So, when you drive around, you listen to the radio stations today, you hear so much 60s music, even now. So people like Mark Devlin, of course, will point out the darker undercurrents of all of this, and I have no doubt that that is correct. But I still think, right, even if this hadn't been manipulated, there was some energy that had to come out. There would have been some kind of cultural, musical revolution in the 60s. And a lot of that music, right, wherever you think it came from and what stimulated it, is fantastic. And you hear it even now on the radio. There's an energy to it that you just can't sort of avoid, and it's the new. Everything was new. The trouble is here today, everything's been done, so everything really has become a recycling project in music. It doesn't mean it's not good, but this was new. Every single new album, every new studio technique, nobody had ever, heard this before. And some of you know I was a musician for many years, and this was my world. So it's interesting to feel that energy, and then see where we're at today, where the biggest acts in the world are people like Taylor Swift. Now, I'm not here to knock Taylor Swift. She has a huge number of fans. She's now one of the most successful artists of all time. But I hear it personally, it doesn't move me. And it's like a lot of music today. It's quite sterile, it's very robotic, minimal melody, quite good lyrics, quite good, honest lyrics. You wouldn't want to be one of her exes, would you? Let's put it like that, right? So that, I'll give her that, but it's not for me. But what's interesting is that it is huge, but it doesn't cross the generations, whereas the 60s, it did. There was something that crossed generations that made a big difference to people's lives. And actually, it was the singer of the Pet Shop Boys, Neil Tennant, who used to be a music journalist and a very good one. He made a very good observation about Taylor Swift. He said, well, yeah, all power to her, all good, but can your grandmother whistle one of her tunes? And the answer is no. And that's interesting, isn't it? It doesn't cross the divide. It's in its box, but that's where it stays. It's boundary. And the people that love it absolutely love it. But it doesn't really cross. And in the old days, where, even your grandma could sing you a Michael Jackson song or whatever it might be, that is not the case where we are today. And there's too much stuff out there anyway. It's too fragmented. So the world has changed on that score. Just keeping in the theme of the 60s in a minute, and you'll see where I'm going to go and how this is going to tie up. Of course, certain events led to a lot of where we are today. So conspiracy theory is now, as you might have noticed, rather big. And despite the mainstream saying how much they hate it, it's also funny how often they report it, if only as they see it, to try to block it, to try to say this is all nonsense. Now, there are some arguments that it was after the shooting of Kennedy, then, of course, all the arguments about what that had all been about, and that is certainly not resolved. Some say that's when they invented that term conspiracy theory to try to kind of blacken the name of those that had very good grounds for questioning. Now, I've always argued, we just need to own that, really now. Yes, there are conspiracies. Yes, sometimes you need to theorize. What is the issue around that? But anyway, it then began to sort of bubble up that people were beginning to question. And certainly this was a pivotal moment. And then, of course, when you got Watergate, which, on the surface is kind of not that big a deal, really, but when it actually unseated the president, and you realize you couldn't even trust the president, which today you'd kind of just take for granted, but back then that seemed like a big deal, that made people question. And then with Vietnam raging, so you had all the creative energy of the 60s, but then you had this darkness coming in on the other side of it, sucking people in, and in America, people were getting drafted. So you got this polarization set up. And in the end, people, of course, stopped trusting authority. And it is interesting because one of the first kind of big things where you saw that happen was when, even at the time, people started to question the moon landings. So even at the time, people were saying, I don't believe this. It's because we're all used to this theory now, and there's people in this room that absolutely do not believe that we went to the moon. But immediately, people were watching it saying, this don't look real to me. And it was because they'd learned not to trust what they were told. So, of course, that led to where we are today. Now, we here for many years have discussed conspiracies and alternative ways of looking at the world. And in a way, the very fact that, it is now so talked about in the mainstream, you can thank people like us, because we've actually brought it to that level where they have to try to combat it. And I don't believe in every conspiracy theory, but I think that some of them clearly have validity, and we've talked about this here over the years. But so in a way, it's a mark of our success that they're now trying to crush it as much as they are, and especially online censorship and so on. But it's not really changing people's minds, because if it was, nobody would believe in conspiracies anymore, would they? But instead, what's happening? Yeah, belief in it's going up and up and up. So clearly, there's some kind of a divide here. And this moment, talking of assassinations, or at least attempts, is really fascinating. Because, look, immediately the conspiracy theories began about a microsecond after this event. Do I need to tell you? You know what this event is. And I've even seen mainstream newspapers running the conspiracy theories. It's funny though, isn't it? I'm neutral on this, but if they're anti-Trump, they love them, and they'll print them. Isn't that interesting? You notice that? And they won't call it conspiracy theory, but, if it's the other way around, suddenly it's just conspiracy theory. But so this has gone mainstream, this kind of thinking, this instant questioning of what you've been told by the authorities. It's just endemic now. This, I do believe, was a historical moment. And, I think it's absolutely changed what is likely to happen here. Well, we'll see, won't we? And look, let's just say this. I mean, like Taylor Swift, right? You might not like him, but he's got enormous amounts of people that see him as the Messiah, especially now, having survived this. And that's the reality. But you got to hand it to a man. And okay, let's say this wasn't staged. And of course, many people believe it was. But let's say it wasn't. You've got to hand it to a man who knows a moment when he sees one. And even though he's just had his earshot off, the genius of that and that picture, it's genius. You've got to hand it to him, right? So where will this go? We don't know. A brief aside, and it's just a very brief aside, and actually Helen alluded to this earlier. It's interesting, though, we don't really believe in politics here. Over there, they do. People seriously believe that one man's going to change everything, right? Okay. It's kind of nice that they got that faith. Over here, okay, so we've got a new government. And you wish them well. You don't want it to do badly, do you? But, of course, most people believe they're as controlled as any other government before. You've always got people like the World Economic Forum and the New World Order behind them. All right. But on the surface, it does matter who we vote for. It does, because often they then go on to become the ruling elite. So actually, who you vote for, it does have an effect. But it's looking not very good here. I mean, it was a bit shocking that so few people turned out for this. Everyone was saying it's the most important election in years. But I'm going to quote Barry Reynolds, who's been on this stage before. He's probably watching. Hello, Barry, if you're out there. Brilliant crop circle researcher, brilliant statistician. So he immediately said, well, look at this, right? The turnout for the general election here was exactly 60%. So that is 40% of people thought, I can't even be bothered to vote. And why might that be? Could it be because they don't really have faith in the system that we have? So then Barry points this out. So Labour, who won here, took 33.8% of 60%, not 100%, right? Thus, 20.28% of voters voted for them. Well, think about that, put it the other way. Or 79.72% of people did not vote Labour. So if you don't live in this country, they've had an enormous landslide, and yet 20% of people voted them in. So that's nearly 80% of people don't want them running the country, but they're running the country. That's not a system people can respect. Now, there's other alternative systems being put out there. They've all got problems. There's the whole proportional representation thing, the transferable vote. I don't know where to go on this, but if they don't change this, people are just going to lose faith. And that's why they say it's not even worth it. The whole thing's just a joke. We are not honestly represented. But look, let's go back to the 60s, but yet not back to the 60s. The other big shadow that hung over many of us, and I remember this, very strongly as a child, was the shadow of the bomb, and that belief that at any moment you might get wiped out. That really terrified me as a child, expecting to see that on the horizon one day. And, many people believe that in itself was a manipulation, controlled by fear. Okay. This has not gone away. I know we all think this can't ever happen, and you pray that it never will, but it's interesting, though, isn't it, just in the last sort of year or so, how much of this kind of talk we've heard. So John Healey MP put out the statement that we are now in a pre-war world. And that's quite a thing to say. All right, so he's basically saying World War III is probably on the horizon. Now, have you noticed in the mainstream how many people now say that? Just quite casually. Oh, yeah, well, we're probably heading for World War III. I don't know about you. I gave a talk here years ago in my little book, Oneness of Mind. There's a transcript of it called World War III and Other Non-Events. Because in the wake of 9/11, everyone was going on about it's going to be World War III. And I was saying, let's not think like that, because you're then basically visualizing that happening, and that's dangerous if you look at the collective consciousness mechanism. But it's all around us. This is a headline I saw literally 4 or 5 days ago. I just photographed it off the front of a paper. If you can't read that. UK has 3 years to get ready for war, new army chief warns. Britain must prepare for conflict against an axis of upheaval, not an axis of evil. It's a new spin on it, axis of upheaval. As Russia, China, North Korea and Iran work more closely together, and so on. So we are having the ground prepared to get us used to having a big war. Have you noticed this? I don't like that, because they should be putting their energy into not having a big war. There's a joke in Blackadder Goes Forth where they say the reason we had World War I was because they couldn't be bothered not to have a war, because it's almost easier just to have a war. Because many have argued that the New World Order want that, because then they can manipulate that and come in and pick up the pieces afterwards. I mean, I don't know. But we shouldn't be thinking on those lines. It's time, surely, to be putting the energy into actually making sure this doesn't happen. But it's something to watch out for. Now, of course, in the 60s, just to go back to the 60s, there was a reaction against it and against the bomb, CND and all of that, and the love and peace movements and the hippie movements. And I was only very small, so I wasn't part of this, obviously. Some of you were. But it was a reaction against all of that. They didn't want a world of darkness and fear. They didn't want the authoritarianism that, their parents had had, and, military service, and they'd often been in the war themselves. It was a way of breaking away from all of that. But then you got this kind of new thinking coming out, where it was all bets are off. Let's live truly free. And it was, free love, man, free drug. No, let's just go for it. But then, of course, as the way these cycles go, it begins to organize itself into other ways. So then when you get into the 70s, you get this kind of 70s version of the hippie movement. And then we get the development of things that are affecting our world today. And two of the people that came out of those times were these two gentlemen here. Bill Gates, looking very young now. By the way, he'd just been done for a traffic violation. That's why he's having the mugshot. That is a real shot. And Steve Jobs, who would, of course, then found Apple. And it was people like this who came out of this hippie revolution, who created the technology that has led us to where we are today. And I'm not saying that they ever intended any harm, but the reality is that it is a direct line from there to where we are now. So all the freedom, love, peace, man, there's also, on some levels, freed us information-wise. It's also helped to imprison us. And maybe that's just the way these things go. There's always a dark and there's always a light. So here we are today where the fruits of that technology are about to turn our world upside down. So I don't want to repeat myself from what I did last year. If you want to see how I demonstrated how AI can write very good poetry and do very good art and all sorts of things, watch my talk from last year. You'll find it on YouTube, Artificial Intelligence and Artificial Freedom. So, because I don't want to go into that. But it's worth watching because I still think many of, certainly people like ourselves, more alternative-minded thinkers, we don't really grasp how huge this is. But that, together with the other factor coming around the corner, is big. But if you missed that, very brief recap. This is the one slide I'm going to recap. How will AI affect us? Well, banking, that's been run by AI for years. So the world of money, that is now already effectively governed by AI, has been for a while. Science, it's changing everything. A lot of science will now be done, not by people necessarily thinking, but by machines that can think far more quickly. And that's about to accelerate hugely, as we'll see in a minute. Medicine, we heard yesterday, AI is now basically diagnosing you. You won't be going to see a doctor soon anyway, because you can't find one over here anyway. It'll probably be diagnosed by AI. And the trouble with that is then it will start to predict, when it looks at your genes, what it thinks you're going to get. And that's going to get back to the insurance companies or whatever. That's the bad side. The good side is it will probably come up with amazing solutions. And we'll all be a lot happier and healthier. Maybe. Well, that's the hope. Industry, obviously, is transforming industry. I'll give you two examples in a minute of where that is massively changing things. Military, well, do you need me to say this to you? Imagine AI and super robots, not there yet, but there will be, coming at you at the battlefield, right? Terminator is coming our way very, very soon. Journalism, right, so if you read Private Eye, which is an important read, but very frustrating because I hate conspiracies, but on the other hand, they're endlessly exposing them. Anyway, there we are. Many journalists are now being laid off because it's just cheaper to get these articles written by AI. And now it's writing so well that the average person can't really tell the difference. You just put in the facts, you tell it what you want to, put out there, and it'll write it. I've met so many people now who said, oh yeah, I got AI to write my wedding speech or funeral eulogy or whatever. And they are. And of course, that's a rocky road, because in the end, there will be no creative talent getting paid. Books. Art. Well, I demonstrated last year, and I'll show you one example in a minute of what it can do with art. Books. So I write books. I've got a new book coming out next year, by the way. But more on that later. It'll be going right back to paranormal stuff. But in 10 years' time, is anyone going to pay me to write a book? Probably not. Probably not, because now many books are being written quite happily by AI. It's now shown people don't care. As long as it entertains them or gives them the information they want, they don't care. And that's the issue. People like ourselves probably are worried about losing the human element. A lot of people are saying, well, if it's giving me the same effect, does it matter? Well, there you go. But then creative people aren't getting paid. How's the economy going to work? Well, I think you can work that one out for yourself. Education, well, I think that is going to be the future of education, to be sure. Just to make the point about art, and this is really interesting, right? So I did a little experiment on all of you this year to see how many people remembered what I showed at my talk, and clearly not many of you, because the artwork we used for the symposium this year is AI. So I showed you, I was honest last year, how we generated it. So with the help of my son-in-law, we put some artwork together that could be used for the symposium, just to see what it could do. And that was, I think, the first one that it came up with. And it just thought about that in about 30 seconds. It went, bing! And we just said we want a flying saucer, we want something like the tour, mystic or simple. And that's what it came up with. And so I thought, okay, let's use it and see who spots it. Nobody has. And lots of people have said, oh, I love your artwork this year. Yeah, and it's better than anything I've ever done before. And there's the issue. And it's funny because Alex from Nexus magazine, when I sent him the artwork for our advert, he said, oh, I love it, brilliant. And then I said, all right, I'm going to be honest, it's AI. And he went, oh, I don't know if I like it so much now. And there it is in a nutshell, right? Does that change our perception? Is that beautiful or not? It is. But should we do it? I'm not saying we're always going to do this, but isn't it interesting? The average person doesn't care anymore. If it makes them feel something, that's it. So that's the world we're heading for. And just to go back to the point of education, I saw an advert for this, right? AI tutoring. This is the future. And look, we've got a lot of classrooms now where, for whatever reason, children are all either ADHD or they're autistic or they're not controllable. Helen and I know some people that have retired from teaching because they say it's just not workable. You can't actually manage these people anymore. So, is it overstimulation from phones or whatever? Something in the water, toxicity in our environment? Yeah, probably all of those things. But I think a time will come where it's actually, A, not even necessary to educate them like that, and B, not feasible to do it like that. So everyone will be at home just plugged in, because kids respond, of course, to electronics. That is now their world. Might not be our world, but even here, we've seen people just doing that when there's a talk on. Don't do it, folks. But that's the world we're in, and that's the reality. Something that happened since last summer was the Bletchley Park AI Summit. So Bletchley Park, of course, is where a lot of what would eventually lead to AI was developed in the war and the Enigma machines and all of this. So here is all the people at the end, all smug and happy with themselves because they sat down and talked about it and basically had concluded there wasn't a problem. And it's all going to be all right. And the reason they were basically saying, oh, well, you don't need to worry too much, because, of course, people worry that we might be made utterly redundant. AI might destroy us when it decides it doesn't need us and so on. So they allegedly talked about this, but they went, oh, no, it's fine, because it's going to make us all very rich. And they were under very heavy pressure from corporations who are behind AI not to diss it, right, to support it. And I found it really fascinating that out of all this lot, actually, only one person told the truth. And it's not necessarily a person you want to hear the truth from. And that person was Elon Musk. And he cut through all the bullshit and said, yeah, but you're not going to have any jobs at the other end of it. And you're going to have to rethink the economy. Which leads you into Great Reset territory, doesn't it? And he was honest, and I think he's right. But everyone else was pretending it's all going to be fine. Yeah, it will be, because they're going to make so much money. And have you noticed somebody else who suddenly came out of the woodwork after Labour got into power, talking about AI? Ta-da! Tony Blair. He always pops up here, doesn't he? And within days, about 2 days, right, you realise who's the real power behind the throne now here. And he says, we must embrace AI. That will get the economy going. It will save us. It'll run the NHS. And he's possibly right that, yes, we will do that. But the fact that he's behind it immediately makes you think, oh, God, we better not, So you're beginning to see the pieces fall into place. And, if Tony Blair is not New World Order, I don't know who is. That's why it does matter who you vote for, by the way. You might think that it doesn't change anything, but it allows people like this to rise to where they are now. And by the way, the Tony Blair, whatever it is, foundation or institute, now advises, this is scary, 44 different countries. That's the reality of the world we're in, right? Now, if you'd like to hear more about this, I recommend this book, And I hadn't read it, by the way, when I gave my talk last year, and then I read it a few months afterwards. Every now and then, but this might be the biggest one, you read a book that I could not sleep after reading it. You must read it, even though that doesn't sound like a recommendation. So this is the book, The Coming Wave, by a man called Mustafa Suleyman. And he is one of those people that's been behind AI. He's one of the big cheeses. And he's finally got to the realization, actually, oh yes, look at what we've created. Maybe we better warn people about this. No, he's very good and he's very honest about it. And he lays out, look, this is what we've done, and this is what it's going to lead to. And I tell you, well, Helen would tell you, I was reading this, right, with the bedroom light next to me, and I couldn't sleep because it's so shocking. The realities that he just points out to you. All I've done in this talk today and last year is Toy Town stuff. You want to get to the nub of it, you want to read this book. So I'll give you just a few of the findings that he lays out. So it's not just AI, other things are coming. Quantum computing is a big one. Now, if you don't know what this means, in essence, it's a way of a lot faster calculation, because it isn't just treating everything as a 1 or a 0. It can do the middle stuff. It can be indeterminate, which actually enables you to have a far faster and a far more powerful system. Now, they're a bit shonky at the moment. You need a lot of cooling equipment and that, but they reckon that will change, and soon, eventually, everyone will have a quantum computer. They can calculate things so quickly. It'll basically work out the answer to life, the universe, and everything, probably in about 10 minutes, eventually. And of course, what does that mean? Well, on one level, brilliant, you can calculate anything, and we will understand things about the cosmos that we've not been able to make sense of. Maybe it will realize that a lot of the science we're being fed at the moment just doesn't really make any sense. So there is that. But of course, the other side of it is, yeah, but hang on a minute, if anybody can do that with a quantum computer, where's that going to lead? And he then tells you where it's going to lead. So he says the thing they'll be able to work out is what is the exact molecular pattern of anything. So if you want to design something, where do you go with this? Well, you just tell it what you want to design and it will work it out. And it will be a bit like a 3D printer, but on a far grander scale. It will just create it. So you won't be hammering things together with nuts and bolts and screws anymore. It will just come out created. And the other way you'll do that is to just do it using organic material. So you will grow things rather than build things. And it will do it happily and wonderfully, and it will be extraordinary. But of course, you know, that's leading us into a very different world. The sci-fi world we've always imagined of panels and buttons and flashing lights. That isn't going to be the future. And of course, we've already talked about this, medical advances. Well, there's going to be many of them. And he talks about that. So he says, like, here's the good. Some of the bad, and this is a serious one no one's really thinking about, no encryption. So you all love the fact WhatsApp, right, is completely encrypted and nobody can get into your WhatsApp messages. Well, if everyone's got quantum computers, everyone will be decoding each other's messages every day. You won't be able to encrypt it because another program will just de-encrypt it, if that's the word. And so how are you going to protect information? We've just seen recently with some of the cyber attacks and, you know, accidental shutdowns, how vulnerable the world is to this. So when we can't hide anything, you're all going to be buying filing cabinets again because the electronic world will simply not be safe unless they come up with some solution that we just haven't thought of yet. But at the moment, it's a really serious issue. Arms races. Well, again, back to the military. Imagine what a military mind is going to do with that kind of computing power, yes? Will anybody be left at the other end? DIY catastrophes. So he says, look, the thing is eventually this stuff always gets cheaper, as AI has. Already now, people have got AI programs that 20 years ago only the US government would have had in some bunker. Now you've got it on your computer at home. And he was saying, actually, right, so cyber attacks are becoming so easy to do. We're seeing that happen a lot. One day everything will shut down, by the way, and it'll probably be deliberate for some reason. And then you better make sure you don't need your phone in your life, eh? Because the ones that need that, they're going to really struggle. And the other thing is not just computer viruses, real viruses. He says already, if you've got about 10 grand and you could just buy the right equipment, even with existing computing power, you could probably create a virus that could wipe out a fair amount of the population. And anybody will be able to do that. So how do you contain that? And then he comes to a really fascinating point of the book. And he's not saying he wants this, but he's saying ultimately you wind up then having to contain this kind of tech through a dystopia, where you can't allow everyone to have it. You'll have to control access to information. You'll have to control access to technology, because if you don't, the world will probably end. And he doesn't say that's good. He says we need to find a middle ground here. And he says, I do not want to wind up living in a country like China, where everything's extremely authoritarian. So these are the things that we're coming to. So if you've never read this book already, right, I urge that you do, just to get wise and to know what's coming, and then maybe we can start to work on a few solutions ourselves and how we're going to wear our hard hats through this, because this is coming, whether you want it to or not. Right. So with all this going on, something else is going on. A massive upsurge in the awareness to do with the UFOs, or as we must now call them UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Because, of course, that was a fantastic way of the US government owning it suddenly. So they created their own phrase. Well, we're all starting to use it, so there we go. But it means the same thing. Here's a very old flying saucer allegedly filmed by Billy Meyer. But, you know, this stuff's been around for a long time and generally disregarded by the mainstream until, as you've seen over the last few years, and we've had people speak about this, the US military had to acknowledge certain bits of film that got leaked. And rather than say, no, it's fake, they said, all right, yes, it's real. And it's like, oh, really? Okay. And then finally they announced, we do think this is a real phenomenon. Now, they keep saying they don't think that it's alien, but they don't know what it is. And the fact is this, they've now acknowledged something is flying around that defies all the known laws of physics. And when that tech goes public, whether it's alien or foreign tech or black ops military, again, the world turns upside down. Because that changes our whole understanding of physics. And that's the importance of the whole UAP phenomenon. It's not even so much about where it comes from, although it kind of does matter, but that tech does exist, and they've acknowledged that it exists. It changes everything. And of course, we've had very high-level people for a few years bubbling up with this. So you might remember some years ago, even Paul Hellyer, who was the Canadian Defence Minister for a number of years, said that when he was in office, he saw clear evidence that the US was in contact with ETs, that they did have ET technology. So, you know, that was quite something. He was one of the first people to really break out and say that. And then, although he's gone quiet since, Professor Haim Eshed said the same thing, Israeli scientist. And of course, the big one now is David Grush. So last year, suddenly, this whistleblower, deep from the military intelligence, comes forward and said, yes, it's all true. He hasn't seen the evidence for himself, but he knows enough people in that world who have told him, absolutely, the US has aliens, it's got craft, all the usual claims. He said it is real. So that was quite a big thing. Now, of course, as a result of him working for the military intelligences, not everybody trusts him. So someone's saying, oh, yeah, do we believe him? How do we know this isn't a big double bluff? And of course, we don't know. But nonetheless, this led in the end to the congressional hearings last year. This was a pivotal moment. If you haven't watched this, go onto YouTube and watch the full 2.5 hours. It's utterly riveting. Where for the first time, it took a lot of wangling to get this to happen, Grush and two very well-known military pilots testified to the reality of this phenomenon. And some of what they came out with was kind of concerning, but really watch it, right? You want to understand where the world's going, you need to watch this. The hope is there's going to be further hearings, but there's now resistance. And I'll say why there's resistance in a minute. There are so many sightings now, every single week, of incredible stuff. Now, of course, we live in a world of AI, deepfake technology. You can't trust anything anymore that you see, hear, whatever, unless there's a lot of different people filming it. And some of it, there is verification. And some of it just feels real. And you think, okay, honestly, you would not believe what is going on out there. One good way of keeping up with it, by the way, is some of the UFO podcasts. And, some of them have been talking very loudly about this event. So you might have seen on New Year's Eve, there was a claim that aliens arrived in this shopping mall in Miami. And it is, if you watch the footage, more police cars than you can ever imagine show up for this. It's like the end of the Blues Brothers, right? If you've ever seen that. And it's like, what? And allegedly they were called out because some children were letting off fireworks. Do you really need that many police cars? But others came out saying there's weird creatures stomping through the mall. Aliens arrived. Blokes came, they opened this weird box up, and suddenly this portal or vortex opened up, and these creatures started walking around the mall. Now, there's claimed film of it. You know, it's controversial. Maybe we'll see more evidence for this. But I don't know whether it was true or not. The authorities say absolute nonsense. It was just kids messing around. But the fact that it actually got so much media coverage, even in the mainstream, mainly in America more than here, because they're bigger on that there, is really fascinating. It's another sign that everyone feels we're ready for something, some big revelation. I mentioned the podcast. Here's just 2 good podcasts if you want to get up to speed. One of them, English guy called Ben Caspersight. It's kind of played for laughs, but not really. And although it's very entertaining to watch, he'll show you footage you won't get to see anywhere else and just talks through it. He's not too judgmental, and I like that. And the other one is Vetted. I mean, anytime I'm anywhere in the kitchen, if Helen's around, she'll be listening to one of these. It's great. I pick all this up. I don't have to play it personally. Vetted with Patrick Scott Armstrong. I mean, he is very discerning. This is where you're going to find out what's really going on. They're very good. They try not to judge, but they will tell you this is what's filtering through at the moment. And the other big players are the Soul Foundation. So they were very instrumental in helping to get those congressional hearings set up. So look them up because they're doing incredible work. They have scientists. They're serious thinkers. They're not a bunch of people even like us. You know, they would probably not want to be seen here, sadly. But nonetheless, they're doing good. You know, they're very scientifically saying this is a real phenomenon. It's time to investigate. But one of the things that came out of the congressional hearings was, yeah, but this might be darker than you know. So it was announced harm had come to various US personnel from UFOs. And then, of course, you think, oh, right, is this the agenda where they want us to fear them? Or is this true? And this is always the problem. You don't know, do you? What's an agenda? What's actually real? When you watch it, I felt it had a smack of authenticity to it. So this matters, because what if there was a darker agenda? Does this explain actually why somebody doesn't want to tell the world what's going on? I mean, if we briefly go back to the day the Earth stood still, you may remember that the robots are effectively AI. It's not evil, but it's been programmed not to stand for any nonsense, and it can destroy the world if it decides it wants to. And that's kind of what people are picking up. It's not that what's around necessarily is evil, although some think it might be. There's factions maybe, but that it's blooming powerful. And just to pretend this isn't going on, not being ready for what might arrive, is maybe not wise. As a total aside, by the way, but I just got to show you this. I just did think it was interesting. So there's Gort the robot. Have you seen the new Apple glasses? There they are, which transmit the net basically in front of you. It's been tried before, but they reckon it's about to take off. So as you walk around, you're going to see information flashing up about what you're looking at. That's the beginning of the world, if we're not already there, where nobody will ever be present. Imagine the dinner table now and all the kids are wearing them, eh? So the world is changing. But I mean, any advanced civilization that has managed to reach space and is visiting here in their craft must surely have gone through the AI revolution. Surely they have. And that is now widely seen as a likelihood, that every advanced civilization must get to this stage where suddenly the organic life, the way everything used to work, the way we used to think, actually is just upended almost overnight. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And some people, therefore, think that what is visiting us may not be quite what we think it is. I'll show you here. This is the conclusions of an article about, spacefarers and AI. I'll read it. It concluded, fundamental biological limitations will make long-distance space travel all but impossible for organisms. So all this, us all living on Mars next year, right? It ain't happening. AI is more suitable. In fact, it is just about inconceivable for any advanced civilization, particularly a spacefaring one, to exist without AI. And then it says, therefore, we should expect more planets in the universe to be populated by AI than little green men. Isn't that interesting? And of course, those that have had contact or believe they have with aliens or the greys or whatever have long said it's like they're not quite proper beings. They're almost a bit robotic. They're organic, yes. Are they the AI? And that's it. They're not really the original people that sent them because they're probably long gone. This is what they turn themselves into. So remember, the biological technology, many people believe that is exactly what we're dealing with. Now, I need to say, other races are also available, right? The Nordics, the reptilians, say something about that in a minute, and so on. Some seem to be neutral, some seem to be nice, others not. But isn't that fascinating? And is it that they know that when a civilization gets to this stage, that they know what's going to happen? Is that why this is bubbling up more now? Are they here now, either to help us get through this period and share their lessons, or to take advantage of it? And that, of course, is what we don't know. Either way, truly, the world will turn upside down. That's a very old pamphlet from the 1600s when everything seemed to be going very strange. But I think we really are now at that stage. And yet for all of this, and everyone's talking about this, I'm being told by Helen I've got 10 minutes, that's all right. We're told still it's not real, despite the congressional hearings. So if you look up ARROW, that stands for, it's a great name, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. So that's like the official military word on any weird stuff. And of course, despite the congressional hearings, they came out and said, nah, it's all phooey. No evidence that US covered up existence of UFOs. Right, will you really believe that? And it's absolutely clear when you look at the evidence, that's whitewash. A lot of people were really angry because they were hoping that the congressional hearings would in some way, open the gates to all of this. And we'd all be now talking openly. But others have said, have you considered, though, why they might not want the world to know this? Right? Nobody really believes that statement, by the way. So why wouldn't they want us to know? Okay, there's a number of possibilities. Number one, military-industrial forces like Lockheed Martin and big companies want UFO technology for themselves. They do not want anybody else to have it because it will give them incredible financial advantage. So that makes sense on one level. It's a commercial imperative. They don't want this tech going public, or not yet, not until they control it. And the other thing is, it gives you international advantages. Now listen, surely Russia and China must have had their own crash UFOs, yes? Surely they must also be researching this, and yet it does seem to be the US in particular that seems to be at the forefront of it, from what we can tell. And of course it would, to have that technology gives you massive advantages. You don't share it too quickly. So that might be another issue. It undermines authority. When you know there's a higher power up there, why are you going to listen to the people you just voted for at the ballot box with a piece of paper and a pencil? Right? When you know there's beings out there capable of incredible things, people are going to start to look to them, or as it says there, hope they're going to save us. Some might not. That then becomes a problem. So the day you announce ETs are here, and yes, they're very powerful, we'll go, I don't want to talk to you lot. I want to hear what they've got to say. I want to talk to the organ grinder, not the monkey. You're going to get all of that. And then you've got the fear of public reaction. I don't think that is actually such an unwise fear to have. I think a lot of people will be very, very concerned. We're used to thinking about this. And yet for all the years of talking about ETs and everything here, at this conference here, the symposium, we've never really faced this one. And we're used to it. But if you're not, can you imagine how some people will react to knowing there is a force out there that, as we know, by the way, can shut down nuclear bases? It can do what it wants. And the other thing is religious sensitivities. In America now, there's a big movement saying these are not aliens, they're demonic. Because there's a lot of that thinking over there, that this is a demonic force we're dealing with. And I've actually even heard that in the conspiracy world over here. It's not alien, it's demons, it's satanic. And okay, we don't know is the answer. And it does then lead to this path of, okay, well, what if there was a dark agenda? So some have hinted that these beings, or some of them, maybe not all of them, have the technology almost to absorb your soul, not just come and kill you. They take your very essence and suck that away somewhere. But is that just a fear? But there's hints that, look, they know things about the universe that we don't. Or is it that it's not that they're hostile as such, but they have information that's going to blow our minds apart? And this is something we've heard from a few sources. Look, you're going to find when you actually start to interact with these beings that reality is not what you think it is. And actually, the revelations will be so shocking. And maybe we're all living in a matrix-like sort of AI environment. We just think we're alive in this universe. I don't know, but it will be so fundamentally shocking to people that the human race won't survive it, because just we will not be able to deal with the implications. So there's some people saying that as well, that it's more that this is going to reveal something you really don't want revealed. But on the other hand, is that just shadow dancing? We do live in times at the moment where there's great concerns, and many people are worried about the world. Is that just controlled by fear, though? And are we finding people projecting their fear onto this? And it's just our shadow. And actually they turn up and they're all very enlightened and it's all lovely. You know, we don't know is the answer. But I certainly, in the same way, said about war, let's not just go around talking about World War III like it's an inevitability, because you're going to help bring that about. Same here. Let's not talk that it's an inevitability that there is a dark thing here. Maybe it's like anything, it's light and dark, and we're going to have to deal with all of it. So I'm very aware of that. I think people are projecting their own shadow onto this at the moment. But one thing is true in these times ahead, that even if the aliens turned out not to be there, and it was some cruel hoax and double bluff, this is true. They think that AI will reach what they're calling a point of singularity very, very quickly. That is where it reaches basically an intelligence level that is above us, and in the end leaves us behind. And then it begins to understand all information, and when quantum computing comes in, you've got a force so powerful that we are basically just utterly redundant. That point apparently is coming a lot sooner than they thought. People were talking 100 years away, they're now talking 10 years away, because that's the exponential growth of this incredible technology. We need to understand what's happening and be ready for this. We've been talking for long years at this conference about change and, this feeling that something was in the offing, and that the crop circles especially were announcing this. Well, I suspect they were. But it's funny, isn't it? Many of us were hoping for instant ascension and enlightenment. And, I've long argued it's probably not going to be like that. We were meant to learn the spiritual lessons that we've been learning, perhaps, to see us through these times. And the crop circles were just the start. And then, of course, it led us to look at things like UFOs and other paranormal phenomena and discovery of ancient knowledge. And we've talked about all of these. And we had the whole 2012 prophecies, where I still think there is a clear demarcation where massive change has occurred, by the way, since that day. So I don't think that was nothing. And Jeff Stray will be on next. I think was absolutely on the money on that, even if not everything came true. And then, of course, this led us to realize, but then there are dark forces that don't want us to hear this, as I'm sure they don't. And they try to control us, and they try to push it all down. I always felt there would be a time when maybe human history would all kind of come together, and all the lessons we'd learn would suddenly make us all wonderfully enlightened. I kind of realized a few years ago it's going to be a harder road than that. And I think certainly AI is going to change everything, and we need to make sure that we remain on top and not the AI. But I think we're at the end of an era. It's funny, isn't it? These two formations, so that was the first big pictogram in 1990, and then a near replica arrived just last summer. Not quite the same, but almost exactly the same. And I find that interesting. It was like the closing of a circle. And this year, right, yes, there's been a few, but it's very quiet. And I suspect that maybe that's where we're at. You get a few crop circles, it's always going to bubble along, but those days, they've done their job. Here we are, right? We've actually got to this point that we are talking about a new dawn, but it's just not necessarily the easy dawn that we thought. And that doesn't mean that we should despair. We should use all the knowledge we've learned, all the enlightenment we like to think we've got now, and apply it. Because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I'm glad I won't be alive for much longer. That's pathetic. I hear it all the time. It's utterly pathetic. Right, you are here. Why did you come here? Right, if you want to go down the reincarnation route, you're here. What do you want to do? Just stick your hand under a pillow? Use what you've learned to help make it the positive experience that maybe at least some of it could be. I'm nearly finished. I just got to show you this quote from Lord of the Rings. For those that say, oh my God, this life's terrible, why am I living in these times? Okay, this is a wonderful quote from the book. It's kind of in the film, but not quite. Read the book. And Frodo says to Gandalf, Frodo the Hobbit, talking about the rise of the Dark Lord and Mordor, he said, I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. And I think the answer Gandalf gives is wonderful. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And the wisdom of that, I live that every day. I try to think about that, right? Yes, we are here. Deal with it, right? If this happens, understand that it might not make you feel in the way you think it might. It will bring great confusion. Right? If the UFOs do turn up, a lot of people won't believe it. They think it will be a hoax and so on. How will we know? I don't know. But I would say now, start to get ready for how are you going to feel if this does happen? How are you going to feel if AI singularity happens? Not as a big, woe, it's me, but as, okay, how am I going to deal with that sensibly, centered, peacefully? Because I think the more of us that learn to do that and go into the world with something positive to take in, right, the more we're going to cope better. And those of us that have been learning these lessons here for a long time, right, we surely now need to use that. Now, I know this isn't a talk that has you punching the air, right, but those are not the times we live in. We live in the hard hat times now, right, and it might save your life, eh? So listen, everything you learn here this weekend and all the other things you're doing, apply them, use them positively, and I do honestly feel we will get somewhere in the end if we all do that. So thank you for coming to this event, because it counts, and live gatherings still count, and the ideas you're going to share in the cafes and in the streets later across this weekend, it matters, and know that it matters, but also enjoy it as well. So thank you for listening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for a very thought-provoking talk there.
Thank you.